So, hi everyone. We will be conducting a sort of mock DevOps and cloud engineer level interview with Akash today. And welcome, Akash. We'll try to see where you stand, what sort of projects and experiences you bring. You ready to apply for future roles, and just some sort of feedback towards the end.
Sure,
So, can we start with an overview of your profile, what sort of experience you bring, what sort of tools, technologies you are working on in your recent couple of roles, and then we
sure,
can take it from there.
sure. I'm working as a senior DevOps engineer in my current company, which I have an experience of 5 years and 4 months. The work role that is currently I'm working on is Azure specific. So I'm more of Azure native cloud DevOps engineer. And the work that I currently do, it involves technology as Kubernetes, Terraform, Dockers, Azure Cloud, and it also so Python is also there where I work on. And other than that, I think these are the top technologies that I currently work on day-to-day basis. Other minor tech, for example, Git and related stuff is also involved. So if I were to mention the specific expertise that I have, I think Azure Cloud and Kubernetes would be my core skills that I work on and have good experience.
That's good. That's
So
good. I haven't seen people claiming strong experience in Kubernetes as such. They would have an
yes.
overview sometimes, especially like you mentioned.
So
You didn't mention the Jenkins and the basic stuff,
the reason
which is
being,
good.
Azure pipelines, we are using Jenkins. I've seen the interface I've worked on,
Mhm.
but Azure pipeline is something that we currently work on. And the projects that I've done, multiple projects, they have been Azure pipeline based only. So Jenkins have not touched. The reason being Kubernetes, I'm telling you, is because uh, in my company that I work on, I was one of the engineer who was supposed to get handover,
Mhm.
and things happened, and I was the one who was there as a sole person, as one point of contact. So a lot of responsibilities came on to me, and it was a learning opportunity for me where I could pick some more hardcore skills and perform troubleshootings which were very complex. So
Mhm.
to get into the pod specific logs and identifying the connection from each and every, like to understand the flow from how the traffic is originating from the pod and reaching out to external website at every instance, every hop which was there, at
Mhm.
that granular level of troubleshooting I've done. So
Awesome, which is
I've gained some very good confidence in Kubernetes.
Hmm. Can you let's take it from there then.
Sure.
Can you give me like some sort of idea how what your role has been in such projects like when it comes to apps on Kubernetes cluster? So what was your
Yeah.
role in all this?
So we are hosting the applications by the application team. There's a team which is developing the applications,
Mhm.
and we are providing the infrastructure, backend infrastructure for Kubernetes. Now, these applications are even complex because we have an application gateway, ingress controller, which is standing in front of Kubernetes cluster. And these clusters are also hosting multiple environments of the different applications. So there is a dev and UAT instance of application one. There is also a dev and UAT infrastructure for application two as well.
Right.
And managing these two applications with one application gateway becomes very much complex because there is something which is called Azure Ingress Prohibited Target. So the
Mhm.
moment there is our listener settings, if
Mhm.
you are not creating a prohibited target, and there is a connection or any request to any of the URLs, it will wipe off the other URLs because the namespaces are different. And an
Mhm.
application gateway agent controller which is there, it would try to acquire the namespace and application gateway to itself. So it becomes very complex, and you have to be very aware about what names are there, what workloads are there,
Mhm.
and making any changes. It's like a very stressful thing. Not stressful, but very, you have to be very careful over there. So it can wipe off all the listener settings, and there won't be any way to get them. So you have to redeploy all the pods, and that can cause some downtime.
Mhm.
So the pods are there in the cluster, but in the
Mhm.
application gateway, the configurations, they get wiped off
Wiped off in which like
in the listener
segment?
settings,
Okay.
back in listener settings,
Okay.
because these are the names which are there, right? So namespace would try to use the application gateway for itself, unless you mention that, okay, there are other names in the cluster as well. So don't touch if these URLs are being like
Mhm.
connected.
Okay. I didn't get the wiped out scenario, like in which case they get wiped out.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, let me try to explain this. So let's say there is an application which has URL of application one dot, let's say, and there's an application which is application two dot. Now in the cluster where I have added the application gateway and with application one dot URL, and now if I'm trying to deploy the application two after some times, then I create a new namespace and I configure the application gateway for it and the agent controller.
mhm.
And for example, if I try to deploy a test pod with the URL, so then this new app will wipe off the settings of the previous application one which was there.
Okay, so you have
And
to use some distinguish
yeah,
route, right? That
yeah, because
something.
the behavior of Ajax is to completely utilize the application for itself. It doesn't
Hmm.
care if there are other namespace unless you mention it.
Right. You have
So
to
you have to.
define all the path that are possible in your cluster, that it is
Mhm.
application for application two or
Yeah,
application N, um,
yeah,
that you have to specify. Correct. It's
that's
not
true.
wiping out scenario. It's more like uh,
It's a behavior which is of there.
right.
So
You
you
have
have to
to
be careful.
specify all the clusters that or all
Yes,
the
yeah,
pods that you want to target.
pods, all the namespaces. So you mentioned these are the URLs. These are the namespaces which reside in these URLs. So you have to be careful and mention that. It's like providing the description.
Hmm. So what sort
It's
of applications are they? They are like some sort of static traffic to these applications, or it's scaling up and down.
it's scaling up. So we have deployment sets which are governing these pods,
Mhm.
and based on the number of replica sets that we want to ensure these pods to be running, and it also has persistent volumes that we are ensuring that the data is there persisted, and we are using storage class as blob for these persistent volumes at the backend. So that's Azure native environment. We have an Azure ecosystem, so most of the resources which are there, they are Azure specific.
And where are you storing the secrets for your cluster?
Yeah, so as part of security concerns, we have to encrypt the secrets within the key vault. We are not hard coding them.
Hmm.
And in the security scan, that is observed that they are secrets. So we are storing them in Azure Key Vault, and we are assigning specific, a very granular role. So to if they just need to fetch the secret, then there is a reader role to
Hmm.
that particular service principal. So we are assigning service principal for the clusters and then assigning them roles in Azure.
Okay, good. That is good. That's a good experience you have.
Yeah.
So are you only using some sort of pod scaling, or you are also scaling the nodes as well in your cluster?
Yes, definitely. So we are using virtual machine scale sets and for the node pools, and we have the system node pool and the user node pool. User
Hmm.
node pool is for the applications, and based on the SKU which are there recommended for the application,
Hmm.
and depending on the users, we have the scaling policies, auto scale policies. So we have configured minimum 3, maximum 7 nodes to be spun up in case there's a traffic spike.
Okay, that's good. That's good architecture.
Yeah,
And you are also covering the security aspect, so that is nice.
yeah,
But can you explain, like earlier you mentioned the same cluster hosting, dev,
yeah,
QA, multiple environments of an
yeah.
application. Is that a good approach?
That is actually not a good approach, but since the applications were already deployed, and this is for the development and UAT environment, production, they have unique clusters and unique application gateway. But for dev and UAT, which is more of a test purpose and to save the overhead costs, this is used.
Hmm.
So yeah, for the cost purposes, this has been done.
Okay. And how about some other tools? What's the role of Terraform in all this and this entire cluster? Or
Yeah, so we are deploying the infrastructure using IAC Terraform, and we have a particular module structure for our Terraform codes. So we have different we have about 33 Azure subscriptions, and for every subscription there is a distinct folder structure, within for every subscription there is one distinct folder, and within those folders we have distinction between the resource groups and all the resources type which are there. So it's a very structured layer. So if you want to deploy a VM, then you have to go within the VM folder which is there, and it is using modules because they are certain mandatory parameters that should be there, and the modules are created, so we are using modules to deploy the Terraform codes.
Okay. You have mentioned quite a bit about drift management in your.
Drift management, yes.
Can you explain what is drift in infrastructure and how did you mitigate in that?
Yeah, so see, in an environment where it's an ideal in a actual work environment, what happens is there's a DevOps team that is deploying the infrastructure. There's also 24 management team which is managing the infrastructure. Chances are the 24 team might not be technically skilled to deploy the resources via Terraform, so they to go ahead and make the changes on the portal itself or the cloud, like it could be CLI or the portal itself.
Mhm.
However, since the resources were deployed through Terraform, there is a change because the state file is not having those changes as they were directly done from the portal.
Mhm.
Now, to ensure that we have zero drift, we have to sometimes get at a very granular level of Terraform code, and we have to evaluate how much drift is there
Mhm.
since the last time the Terraform code was deployed. So we have to go at a granular level and go to a resource. I mean, at the resource level, for example, there are disks that are being deployed, right, as part of the VMs. And due to some scenario, they required one more additional disk or disk size to be increased. Now, when you go to and run a Terraform code plan again, you see the SKU has been changed, the disk size has been changed, and whenever we deploy the disks in Terraform, we have the indexing number of the disks. So if you add a new disk, the indexing also changes, and the previous disk like it completely changes and completely disturbs the environment. So you have to go at a granular level, adjust the Terraform code, and so one of my senior mentioned this is a Terraform surgery that is being done. So
Mhm.
you make the changes in the Terraform code so as to replicate the same thing that is there on the portal. So resource
Right.
by resource, you try to remove the drift and yeah, make them as per the Azure resources which are there.
What sort of automation is this? Is more like auditing the infrastructure or uh,
hmm So this is when the resources have been already deployed in through
deployed through
Terraform
Terraform but modified by
and
somewhere else?
modified.
And
Yeah,
then what's the solution that you have implemented in this? Like, I want to understand like a bit more about that.
yeah. In
Now
terms
if
of
you redeploy your infra through Terraform, there is a
mhm,
chance that the manual changes that were made will be overwritten.
that is true. So the automation that was done was during the initial deployment phase,
Mm-hmm.
that the resources which needs to be deployed, they are passed, and we have variables which are having the default values that we want to deploy.
Mm-hmm.
However, this drift remediation is something of a manual task
Oh,
because the differences which are there, to an extent, it cannot be automated since
mm,
we are not aware what changes are there, and yeah, so that's a more of a manual task.
manual task. More
Yeah,
about auditing, check everything that
yeah,
the resource disk and everything is matching with your default values or not.
that is true. Yeah.
Uh, I want to understand a bit more about the security side you mentioned, because now since you are dealing with cloud infra, Kubernetes application deployment, what
Mhm.
sort of security practices do you understand the organizations typically use
Okay,
in cloud?
so in terms of security, we are following the well architectured framework which is there, and based on the guidelines and the pillars of well architecture framework, we are also ensuring our security practices also aligns with them. So as part of security, we are giving a very PIM-based role, which are identity privilege identity management, which is a time-bound role, and it's a very resource-specific role. So if you want access or any users want access to a specific resource, they are given a time bound access, and they are not permanent. So you have to first go to the portal and then evaluate, like activate your role. and then start working on it. And also, if you
So
don't
let's
require.
let's take an example. I am application one.
Mhm,
I am deploying something or my pipelines or maybe a manual change deploying to production tonight.
mhm.
How would you ensure that I have access for a specific window?
Yeah. So what I will do is I will assign a PIM-based role for you. If it's a user, then I will assign a PIM-based role where I'll mention that this role is eligible only for this particular time period
Mhm,
for today's date. And I'll assign the role, for example, their contributor role in Azure.
mhm.
There is, if you even want to go to a very specific role that I don't want you to change anything else other than the network settings, so I'll give you a network contributor instead of a
But how
highly
would you do
privileged
that on
contributor.
without automation? So you have to say as a cloud engineer or a cloud platform team, you have to do it
Mhm.
for hundred of users every day.
So yeah, instead of giving a user role, we have created security groups which are there. So
Mhm.
those groups are having access, and if you want to add the user, you can just add that user to that group
Okay.
where they want access. And if they have done their action and they don't require anymore, then you can remove the users from the group. Also, to even add more layer of security, you can have approvals that if they are activating their role, it would require an approval. Someone would be approving them, only then they can access.
Okay. Yeah, some sort of automation would be helpful in this. Maybe something
Yes.
with your change management system where uh,
Yeah. So what we can also do is we can create a service principal, and we can create a pipeline that the user would be providing an argument that this is the role that I would request.
have you faced
And
any security incident in your organization? Like
uh,
something.
security incident, not an incident as such, but yes, there have been certain security labs. For example, there were resources with public access which were there, which were created. For example, a storage account had a public access that it could be accessed from anywhere. So
Mhm.
they were there, and that was because of the storage account were created by default as clusters, and because of the caching property, they were created and they had public access enabled on them.
Okay.
So we had to manually go ahead and change them
How
and
did you
make the.
identify that someone has done that?
Yeah, so we have a tool which is running and evaluating our cloud platform and identifying if there are open network settings which are there. So there are Azure recommendations as well,
Mhm.
which is there, which would
Which is your
identify.
tool that you mentioned? Is it something custom you guys have
That's
written up?
that's a organization specific tool which
Okay.
is there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other like recommendations is something, Azure recommendations is something.
Yeah, so as we were mentioning about the security aspects of the well-architected framework, we also have the cost aspects as well.
Mhm.
So, as part of my organization, I lead the team for the DevOps, and we have to perform every month a cost optimization activity where we identify what are the scope of cost optimization that can be done. And so there was one incident which happened recently. It was from Microsoft itself.
Mhm.
So the containers which were there, so in the Kubernetes cluster, we are having a central logging policy. So we have log analytics workspace, and it's a central log analytics workspace where multiple logs from different clusters are getting stored and
Mhm.
streamed. And so whenever we enable the cluster monitoring, there is one specific table known as uh, container logs, and they are sometimes very heavy, like they are ingest a lot of volumes in them. And because of a Microsoft glitch, there was this data protection container which is for the Azure backup of containers. So this namespace had the pod, and due to a Helm release, the container logs had a logging of a verbose logging, which was very a debug level logging. And
Mhm.
because of that, the ingested volume increased multifolds,
Right.
and that increased the cost. So we first had to identify who was the reason, like it was it done from our end, or after very troubleshooting and at identifying where the logs was generated through which Helm, which version of the Helm chart it was deployed, we identified it was an Microsoft managed, and this caused about like $20,000 increase in the Loganalytics workspace ingested volume charges. So luckily we got the that fees got waived off because that was something Microsoft specific. However, to ensure that that doesn't happen, we capped the log ingestion, that after 2 GB of ingested volume, that's 2 GB was a data that we decided understanding the previous month's ingestion of volumes. So after 2 GB of data, once it hits, then it gives us a warning that it has capped and it's not ingesting volume anymore. And to further optimize the cost, we have filtered what namespaces that we want to ingest the volume. That, so for example, data protection or kube system namespaces, we are ignoring them, and only the container which is required on only the tables that are required for our monitoring and alerting purpose, that is the only logs which we are ingesting. So this is how we've like minimized the cost and restricted only to the necessary tables and not ingesting all the volumes which are required.
So where is your logs data going? Is it only
It's
in Azure
yeah,
or somewhere else?
yeah. It's only an Azure login workspace, and we are using Azure monitoring, which are there. I know
Mhm.
there are Prometheus, Grafana, which are for monitoring tools. However, Azure, I mean, the services that they are provided in terms of monitoring, that's pretty sufficient, and they do the purpose. So on top of that, we have not required Prometheus. However, there is one new, I mean, there was a requirement to create alert for the persistent volume storage. If it was filling up, we need to
Mhm.
create an alert.
Mhm.
Azure doesn't have it. However, there is a new tool called Manage Prometheus by Azure. So that specific metric can be measured using that.
Yes, usually these custom products will probably be used
Yeah.
in advanced monitoring.
Yeah. So, but I believe if it's not required, if Azure can do the service, then we should use the Azure native tools.
Mhm.
However, if it's required and there's no solution, then we can go further.
And how about like how many such applications do you support in your environment? Is it and all of them are Kubernetes cluster?
Uh, we have the Kubernetes based. We also have VM based,
Mhm.
but they have been deployed, and that's actually being managed by the 24/7 teams. The Kubernetes one is something that we currently are in the critical stage because they are going live. So that's the one which are managing. So about 5 to 6 applications we are managing for different environments.
Hmm. Which is good. How about some other skills like Ansible?
Ansible, I've not worked upon since my work profile never got me chance to work on Ansible.
Mhm.
So Docker, pipelines, Terraform, uh, PowerShell coding, and then Bash coding. These were the main things that I usually have seen.
So you have good experience, Akash. So what's troubling you as such? Is there any? I found your profile specifically around Kubernetes, Terraform, um, quite good experience. Usually people have limited experience in this space. Usually they don't get that much hands-on. You have done it from ground zero.
Yeah.
So what's troubling you? How can we help you?
I mean, this is more of I want to prepare for interviews too, because I'm not sure what is which level do I stand in,
Mhm.
and what are the questions being asked in the interviews. But I've went through mock interviews which are there on YouTube. I've seen the videos. So during the preparation phase, I thought I was not prepared. Maybe I'm not that was skilled up. But after watching the videos, I was pretty confident. I mean, I think I was not to sound arrogant, but I uh, observed that I am skilled, and the questions that I ask are something that I can understand and I can explain. So
At
just
5 year
to,
level, I think you have quite a good experience. Specifically, your language is coming out appropriately. It's like you are talking about well-architected framework. On my channel, you would have seen interviews where 10 plus, 20, 15 plus will not bring these terminology. You are bringing
yeah,
well-architected framework. You are bringing security and cost optimization pillars.
yeah.
A lot
Actually,
of-
the thing is that because in my role and in my company, I've been always seeking out for opportunities, and I've also worked as architect, not a designated role, but
Right.
the
And it's
responsibilities
evident.
that,
That's what
yeah,
I'm, because we haven't spoken earlier. It's evident from
yeah,
the conversation that either you are working very closely in these applications, obviously you're putting in a lot of effort, or you are
Yeah,
surrounded by some good leads or architects around you that are giving you good opportunity to. So it's a mix of everything, I would say. But
yeah,
that's
yeah.
very visible that you are working as a senior person rather than just a DevOps engineer.
Yeah, so because working on the architecture diagrams to draw from a 10,000 feet and going at a very resource specific level,
Mhm.
I was able to understand how the flow works, how everything is managed,
Okay.
how the top level work, like the architects works. I've drawn architecture diagram, like a town plan. So there was this activity where we had to identify, because there are 33 subscription in our tenant, and to identify which resource is related to which resource, how the connection between the subscription flows. I know we can draw network flow diagrams to identify which are there, but from a management specific, because we have a hub and spoke topology of network, and we also have manage like subscription which are common, which are having all the common resources, and then we have application specific subscription also. So to identify where the resources are coming, how they are connected, that was something that I had worked on. That gave me understanding about how a very large organization would have their tenant on cloud. Like there are on-premises resources as well. There are DNS servers, how everything works. So inside out, I got a great picture from it.
No, it's as mentioned, it's very evident, and I think you are pretty much ready. It's you don't have to do more
Okay,
mocks or anything. You, if you are interested, you can start applying, and you should see good results.
sure.
These are strong skills. Your personality and the confidence comes out clearly because you have your self hands-on experience. It's not by watching videos or just by watching somebody else doing the projects. You have your own experience that you can talk
Hmm.
about. You have the right tech vocabulary that you are talking. So you can actually, if you want, you can target for some lead or an architect kind of role as well.
Oh,
You can give it a
thank you.
try. Yeah, you can give it a try. You don't really just
Hmm.
have to like you can target for senior cloud engineers or senior engineers
Hmm.
kind of positions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm really not sure, because the job requirements sometimes require the years of experience. I
Hmm.
think this is where I get lost, because within such 5 years, I've gained a lot of experience,
Right.
and sometimes they might not believe that is this
Yeah,
possible or
that
not.
sometimes that's in their mind if they want to hire someone 8 years, but you can give yourself a bit of buffer and apply for such roles, and then leave
Yeah,
it to the organization if they select it or not. That's something hard to change. But
yeah.
when you look at a role which is senior cloud engineer or DevOps lead or something like that, you can target such roles, I would say.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Also, I had one concern, since I mean, I know there is coding involved, and in my environment, I'm juggling between different languages. So it's sometimes I have to script in Bash, sometimes I have to do in PowerShell. There's Terraform, there's Python also, and I cannot remember the syntax. I'll be honest. I have
That's
a
fine.
handy notepad
That's
file
absolutely fine.
that I generally refer to whenever I have to do the coding. So I'm not sure if in the interviews, if they ask you to code on the go, because this
Usually
is where I might.
there can be some scenarios, and in that case, you can refer to some pseudocode. They wouldn't be asking a compiling version of the source code. They would want to know a bit of structure, how you would structure your
Oh.
maybe a Docker file, maybe a Terraform project, maybe a Python project where you are making some API calls or something. So they may ask you a structure of it, and then instead of giving them the exact syntax, you tell them that this is how I will start by including the libraries that I want in my project. This is my opening statement,
Oh, okay.
maybe in Dockerfile or Terraform, whatever you want to explain. I mean,
Okay.
I wouldn't judge anyone based on their coding skills, especially in DevOps and cloud role. Um, uh, but would still at very high level, would want to know uh, what the structure of a specific project could be.
Because the reason being, I believe I am proficient, because I am more proficient in Bash, right? But there was a task where I had to monitor URLs. Now, these were private URLs which were there, which were only accessible within the uh, private network of
Mhm.
our tenant. And the URL monitoring, which is there available in Azure, only does for the publicly accessible. So I had to create a script, PowerShell script,
Mhm.
and I did not had much experience with PowerShell. So because I was able to, and I believe that if we learn one of the language and
Yes.
understand how the algorithm works, then it's just the syntax which is there.
So- And nowadays, just Gen AI and everything, this is available at your
Yeah.
fingertips. You can anytime have them, use them and get this. So
Yep.
that's not that difficult. Combining all the logic and other things, that just the mindset should be there. That somebody is not panicked by a dev task. That I have
Oh,
to
okay.
create a tool. It shouldn't make them panic. They should know that yes, it's just another PowerShell or a Python project that I can have a template from some project and create my own.
Sure,
So
definitely.
that's how I have seen. Usually, DevOps engineers will not be writing super complex projects. There would be utilities, small
Hmm.
tools, monitoring URLs, for example.
Yeah.
So these are small activities.
So yeah, to make myself proficient, what I'm doing is like I'm utilizing Python to, I mean, fetch and pass the JSON resources. For example, if I have to fetch something from Azure portal, I have to go to the portal, go to the resource ID, extract that particular provider of that. So I can do it from Python as well to automate. So this is how I'm actually preparing
Absolutely.
myself to
This is
be
very good
proficient.
use case. Usually
Yeah.
in Python or as a DevOps or cloud engineer, usually you would be making some API calls, whether it's a Lambda function or a serverless, Azure serverless, whatever function you are writing. Usually it would be small utilities. One of the common thing is to make an API call, get it, send a post request, get the JSON response, and then parse it. And it's a very common thing. So you should definitely do this kind
Yeah.
of use case.
Yeah, because if you search on YouTube for Python, they would start going for all the algorithms which are there, bubble
Absolutely.
sort and stuff. But I believe I have never ever used
You
in
never
my
would get
five
into
years.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what
So
I also tell my students that don't spend a lot of time in programming these, learning the if else for loops
yeah.
and uh, different variable types in Python. You should know that yes, if you have to create lists or some complex type, there are options, but not most of the time you wouldn't be using all these options. You would probably be most likely making an API call, sending a request, receiving a request, parsing a JSON or XML, and then doing some processing on that. So those are some of the use cases through which Python
Yeah.
should be learned. If you can add a little bit of Ansible to your
Hmm.
resume, because PowerShell or these some of these automation will have limitations. So, for example, you may
Okay.
be doing something on a specific EC2 instance through PowerShell, or you can connect to multiple and then you can do some sort of automation, but that's where Ansible comes into a
Okay.
picture. And then assuming that the company that's hiring or looking are using some sort of config tool, so that
Hmm.
instead of saying that no, I have not worked on Ansible at all, try to
Okay.
find some use case where you are managing, say, 10 EC2, 10 VMs, and then how you can automate some of the things on all of them at the same time.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
this was one of my question as well because there are multiple tools and it's actually not possible to learn on all of them.
yeah,
And so, for example, Jenkins I've not worked on, but
that's
I worked
fine.
on Azure pipelines.
Yeah.
And I wanted to understand what are the actual tools that you require because this after we've done this, there's always like you'll be feeling like there's so many tools and there's always one thing that I'm missing out. And so there is SRE roles which are having observability
Yeah.
and which is having the stack EFK stack which is having Fluent and all these stuff. So sometimes I'm not able to understand if I have to learn them as well because
I would not suggest doing all of them, but get an idea around it. Um, whether it's GitHub Action is something in large organizations. If you go to say banking, or they are not, they are all either migrating to GitHub Actions or looking at that
mm,
as an as a their orchestrator, rather than even I have seen organizations using Azure DevOps, or they are looking at GitHub Actions nowadays.
yeah.
So that's something you can explore. Observability, yes, it's very hot. AWS or Azure, they don't rely on the cloud providers' log management, monitoring tools. They look for a Datadog,
Okay.
Sumo Logic. You mentioned the FluentD, FluentBit. Understand these things a little bit. Maybe do a proof of concept someday. Understand
Okay.
what's the difference between FluentD and FluentBit, and uh, in which scenarios they will be useful. So at least you are prepared in case, because the other company, if you target a specific company, it's not necessary that they will have exactly same tools.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
people understand that to an extent, but at the same time, it shouldn't be that you don't know majority of their tools.
Yeah, I agree.
Because then they will start looking at some other candidates or other
Yeah.
profiles. So look for right tools
Okay.
in their category. Like in CICD, you can look for right tools if you are targeting large banks or financial, or this GitHub Action is probably better.
GitLab.
GitLab, a lot of startup
GitLab.
is something they are actively involved in. Small companies, 200, 500 employees level organization, I'm saying, they will get into GitLab. It's not just a generalization, but it may be the other way also. It's not necessary that this is the only selection of tools. In the config management, you can look at Ansible rather than
Hmm.
Chef or Puppet or other such tools.
Okay. Ansible.
Terraform, anyway, you are certified and you are focusing on that. So that's there. Docker Kubernetes is your strong area anyway. So
Yeah.
cloud, you are fixed on, like you are um, on Azure. Then yeah, that's a good combination.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of a cloud different platform as AWS, I have not actually done hands-on, but I'm aware. And what I've understood is that with AWS, I mean, with Azure also, so it's only the branding that has changed for the services. The services stays the same. I mean, the concept is there.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's all the same concept. There's not much of a difference, but at the same time, it's very some of the things, the overall navigation, the console, and some of the uh, what they call account or a
yeah,
subscription in
how
Azure.
the
So
name,
you
yeah,
how things are. The terminology is
yes, yes,
slightly different. So
yeah,
it's up to you whether you want to, given a chance, you want to switch into AWS or that sort of thing. I would suggest you stick with Azure. It's gaining momentum. It's
oh,
always it's competing well. So have your like investment into Azure for now. At the same time, when you get some time, get an overview of AWS, and just in case you are applying somewhere, they are actively on AWS and they want to take a risk with you, and then you can maybe go at the job and then learn it.
sure, sure, yeah. It's always good to learn new
Yeah.
things.
Just learn a little bit, learn in conjunction with Azure.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
learn learn a bit of AWS, then see how a company which is multi-cloud, if they are in AWS and Azure, what sort of communications are possible through VPN or what other options are there. Uh, s- think that a database is in one cloud, the application in different cloud. Think of those possibilities and create some simple projects, proof of concepts for you. And then, yeah, hope for the best, but not go 50-50 that you start getting certified in AWS as well.
Oh, okay.
And that
Yeah.
would be, I would suggest you go deep into one specific cloud,
Oh, okay.
because there are always services and integrations in that specific cloud. So at top 10 services will be common. All your VM, storage, databases, Kubernetes cluster is pretty much there in AWS. So what you see in Azure would be there, but monitoring stuff, a lot of other miscellaneous services will that add value in your cloud platform. They are different.
Okay.
So
All right.
especially their IAM and the authentication and all will be different. So I wouldn't suggest going 50-50 into or going to multi-cloud that early. Go deep into one cloud. If you are already working 5 years on Azure, then I would
Okay.
continue that journey.
Okay. All right. And
All right,
yeah,
Akash, it was nice talking to you. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, wish you luck and
Thank you.
thank you so much. Bye.
All right, bye.